Every day, people walk out their front doors and simply vanish. No witnesses, no logical explanation, just impossible clues left behind. Today, we're exploring the 10 most creepy disappearances in history, cases that completely defy the laws of reality and fuel our deepest nightmares. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and like the video. It really helps the channel. Now, get comfortable and let's get into it. A cruise ship is supposed to be the safest vacation on Earth. Think about it. You're on a floating city. There are thousands of passengers, hundreds of crew members, security cameras, locked cabin doors, and an ocean that acts as the world's largest fence. You can't wander off. You can't get lost. There's literally nowhere to go. The ship is the destination. You eat, you drink, you watch the sunset from your balcony, and the biggest decision you make all day is whether to hit the buffet or the pool first. That's the pitch anyway. That's the brochure. And in March of 1998, the Bradley family bought it completely. Ron and Iva Bradley had won an all-expenses-paid cruise on the Rhapsody of the Seas, a Royal Caribbean liner sailing through the Caribbean. They brought their 2 adult children, their son Brad, and their 23-year-old daughter, Amy. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime: sun, ocean, live music, and family time on the open water. Amy Lynn Bradley was 23, a recent graduate of Longwood University in Virginia. She was athletic, outgoing, and strikingly distinctive in appearance. She had several highly unique tattoos: a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her shoulder, a sun on her lower back, a Chinese symbol on her right ankle, and a gecko lizard on her navel, right next to a navel ring. These aren't generic designs. These are specific, identifiable, one-of-a-kind markings. Remember them. They become the most important evidence in this entire case. One more thing about Amy. She was a trained, certified lifeguard and an exceptionally strong swimmer. That detail matters enormously for what comes next. On the evening of March 23rd, the ship was cruising through open Caribbean water, scheduled to dock in Curacao the following morning. Amy and her brother Brad spent the night doing what you do on a cruise: drinking, dancing, enjoying the entertainment. They ended up at the ship's nightclub, where the house band, a calypso group called Blue Orchid, was performing. Amy attracted attention, a lot of it, specifically from a band member named Alistair Yellow Douglas. Multiple witnesses described the interaction as intense, beyond casual flirtation. Douglas and Amy danced, talked, spent time together throughout the evening. He later told investigators he left the party around 1 a.m. Amy stayed. Around 3:40 a.m., Amy returned to the family's 8th deck cabin. She sat out on the private balcony with her brother Brad for a while, talking, winding down. Eventually, Brad went to bed, leaving Amy awake and alone on the balcony. At approximately 5:15 to 5:30 a.m., Amy's father Ron woke up briefly. He looked toward the balcony and saw Amy curled up on a lounge chair, asleep. The ocean was calm. The ship was quiet. Everything was fine. Ron went back to sleep. 30 minutes later, he woke up again. The balcony was empty. Amy was gone. Her shoes were missing, but her cigarettes and lighter were still on the balcony. Her passport was in the cabin. Her money was in the cabin. She had no identification of any kind on her. Now, here's where the timeline gets critical and infuriating. In that same narrow window between 5:30 and 6 a.m., 3 separate witnesses reported seeing Amy on the upper deck of the ship. She was not alone. She was with Alistair Douglas, the band member from the club. One witness specifically described Douglas handing Amy a dark-colored drink. Douglas, for his part, was seen leaving the upper deck alone shortly after 6 a.m., so the question becomes, what happened in that 30-minute window? Amy was asleep on the balcony at 5:30. By 6, she was gone. 3 witnesses place her with a crew member on the upper deck during that exact gap, and then she simply ceases to exist. The Bradley family's reaction was immediate and desperate. They begged the ship's crew to lock down the vessel, to close the gangways, and prevent anyone from disembarking before a thorough search could be conducted. The ship was about to dock in Curaçao. Thousands of passengers and crew were about to pour onto the island. The crew refused. They said it was too early to make a public announcement. The first announcement didn't go out until 7:50 a.m. By then, the gangways had been open for nearly an hour. Thousands of people had walked off the ship, unmonitored, onto a Caribbean island. Think about that. A 23-year-old woman vanishes from a locked cabin on a ship in the middle of the ocean, and the response is to open the doors and let everyone leave. Let's tear this apart. Because the official explanations don't hold up, and the unofficial ones are terrifying. Start with the simplest theory. Amy fell overboard. This is the cruise line's default posture in these situations. A young woman who'd been drinking all night stumbles on the balcony, tips over the railing, and plunges into the ocean. Tragic, but straightforward. But let's look at the facts. The balcony railings on the Rhapsody of the Seas come up to a passenger's ribcage. You don't accidentally tumble over a chest-high railing. You'd have to actively climb or be lifted. Second, Amy was a trained lifeguard and a powerful swimmer. A fall from the 8th deck into calm Caribbean water is survivable. She would have hit the surface and she would have swum. The Caribbean isn't the North Atlantic. It's warm, it's calm, and visibility is good. Massive Coast Guard searches of the area found absolutely nothing. No body, no clothing, no debris. If Amy went into that water, she didn't drown quietly. And here's the other problem with the overboard theory. Nobody heard anything. No splash, no scream, no sound at all. Her father was sleeping 15 feet away with the balcony door open. Her brother was in the same cabin. If a grown woman fell or was thrown from a balcony into the ocean, someone would have heard something. The silence is the part that doesn't fit. All right, what about voluntary disappearance? Maybe Amy wanted out. Maybe she planned to slip off the ship in Curaçao and start a new life in the Caribbean. People do strange things. But think about that for more than 5 seconds, and it collapses. Amy left her passport in the cabin. She left her money. She left her cigarettes and lighter, the items you grab reflexively if you're stepping away for even 10 minutes. She had no ID, no cash, no plan, and no support network in a foreign country. You don't start a new life barefoot and broke on a Caribbean island. And she'd have to slip past the ship's security systems, disembark unnoticed in the early morning, and vanish into a country where she knew nobody, all without a single camera catching her leaving. It doesn't hold up. And then there are the sightings. This is where the case stops being a puzzle and starts being a nightmare. In August 1998, just 5 months after Amy vanished, a Canadian tourist named David Carmichael was on a beach in Curaçao. He noticed a woman flanked by 2 men who appeared to be controlling her movements. She looked distressed. Carmichael didn't know who Amy Bradley was at the time, but later, when he saw her photo on the news, he contacted the FBI. He described the woman in detail, and then, unprompted, without being shown any reference images, he specifically identified the Tasmanian devil tattoo on her shoulder. Let that sit for a moment. A random tourist on a beach, months after the disappearance, independently identifies a highly specific, highly unique tattoo on a woman being physically controlled by 2 men. That is not a coincidence. That is not a misidentification. You don't guess a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball. In 1999, it got worse. A retired U.S. Navy officer named William Hefner was in a brothel in Curaçao. A woman matching Amy's exact description approached him, visibly distraught, and begged him for help. She told him her name was Amy Bradley. Before the FBI could mobilize and raid the location, the building mysteriously burned to the ground. And then, in 2005, the Bradley family received an anonymous email containing photographs from an illicit adult website. The images featured a woman listed under the name Jazz. Facial recognition experts analyzed the photos and concluded the woman was highly likely to be Amy. She bore the same facial structure, the same anatomical proportions, and critically, what appeared to be the same distinctive tattoos. Now, if Amy drowned in the Caribbean in March of 1998, how do you explain a terrified woman with her exact tattoos begging a stranger for help in a Curaçao brothel a year later? How do you explain a tourist independently identifying the Tasmanian devil on a controlled woman's shoulder 5 months after the disappearance? How do you explain photographs surfacing 7 years later of a woman who looks exactly like her? You can't. Not with the overboard theory. Not with the runaway theory. The only theory that accounts for all of these data points is the one that nobody wants to say out loud. Amy Lynn Bradley was taken off that ship and she was trafficked. But even that theory has its problems. Smuggling an American tourist off a heavily populated luxury cruise ship without triggering a single alarm requires coordination, planning, and inside help. It requires someone on that crew knowing exactly when the ship would dock, exactly how to move a person through the vessel undetected, and exactly who would be waiting on the other end. It's not impossible, but it's an operation, not an impulse. The Bradley family has spent over 25 years searching for Amy. They've hired private investigators. They've traveled internationally. They've dealt with extortionists and hoaxers who exploited their desperation for money. Amy's father, Ron, has never stopped looking. The FBI has never officially closed the case. And the Rhapsody of the Seas kept sailing. The band kept playing. The buffets stayed open. The brochures kept promising the safest vacation on earth. Amy Lynn Bradley stepped onto that ship as a 23-year-old woman on a family vacation. Somewhere between a nightclub and a sunrise, between a balcony lounge chair and a Curaçao dock, she disappeared from a floating fortress surrounded by thousands of people and miles of open ocean. She left behind her passport, her money, her cigarettes, and a family that is never recovered. A cruise ship is supposed to be the one place you can't vanish. No exits, no alleys, no dark roads leading into the unknown. Just steel walls, security cameras, and water in every direction. But sometimes, a floating paradise is just a trap with a better view. If you've never been cave diving, let me paint you a picture. Imagine swimming into a tunnel carved into solid rock. The entrance is wide enough, maybe inviting even, with crystal clear water and beams of sunlight filtering down from the surface. But the deeper you go, the narrower it gets. The light disappears, the walls close in, the ceiling drops until it's inches above your head. The only thing keeping you alive is the air on. Your back and the line you're following out. If you panic, you stir up silt that turns the water from glass clear to absolute zero visibility in seconds. If your equipment fails, there is no swimming to the surface. There is no surface. There's just rock above you, rock below you, rock on every side, and a tube of black water that either leads forward or back. More than 300 people have died in underwater caves just like this. There's a sign at the entrance of the restricted zone at Vortex Spring in Florida that says exactly that. It features the Grim Reaper. It tells you in the plainest possible language that if you go past this point without proper training, you will probably die. On the evening of August 18, 2010, a 30-year-old man named Ben McDaniel swam past that sign, descended into the darkness, and was never seen again. That, on its own, would be a tragedy. Cave diving kills people. It's one of the most dangerous recreational activities on Earth. But here's what turned this tragedy into a mystery. When the best cave diving recovery experts in the world went in after him, they searched every inch of that cave system for 36 consecutive days. They found nothing. Not a body, not a fin, not a scrap of neoprene, not a single trace of biological matter. Ben McDaniel went into a sealed underwater tube and vanished. Ben McDaniel was 6'1", 210 pounds, and built like someone who took care of himself. At 30 years old, he was trying to rebuild a life that had recently come apart. His construction business had collapsed, leaving him millions in debt to the IRS. His marriage had ended in a painful divorce. And worst of all, he'd found his younger brother dead from a brain aneurysm, a sudden, devastating loss that shattered him. So Ben did what a lot of people do when everything falls apart. He ran towards something that made him feel alive. He moved to his parents' vacation home in Florida, entirely funded by their support, and threw himself into scuba diving. The water was his sanctuary. It was the one place where the debt, the grief, and the failure couldn't follow him. Now, here's an important detail. Ben was a certified open water diver. That means pools, reefs, shallow ocean dives, the recreational stuff. He was emphatically not certified for cave diving. Cave diving requires specialized training, specialized equipment, and specialized gas mixtures to manage the pressure and oxygen toxicity at depth. Ben didn't have any of that, but he kept going deeper. He'd been coming to Vortex Spring regularly, pushing his limits, mapping the cave in his personal logbook, and venturing past the restricted gate into zones that could kill a certified expert. He knew the risks. He went anyway. And the staff at the dive shop let him. On the evening of August 18, 2010, Ben arrived at Vortex Spring and geared up for a dive. Employees at the dive shop saw him enter the water. One employee specifically unlocked the metal gate blocking the restricted lower cave area to let him through. This wasn't unusual. Ben had apparently talked his way past the gate multiple times before. He descended into the cave system and disappeared beneath the surface. Nobody thought anything of it, not that night. The next day, August 19th, Ben's pickup truck was still sitting in the dive shop parking lot. Staff noticed it but didn't raise an alarm. Divers sometimes stayed overnight. By August 20th, 2 full days after the dive, the truck still hadn't moved. Police were called to Ben's rented condo. Inside, they found his beloved dog, alone, hungry, unwalked, and waiting by the door. That was the moment everyone understood something had gone terribly wrong. Ben McDaniel would not have left that dog for 2 days. Not willingly. Not ever. A massive recovery operation launched immediately. The assumption was straightforward. Ben had drowned in the cave. All they had to do was find him. What followed was one of the most extensive underwater recovery operations in Florida history. 3 teams of 16 specialized cave diving recovery experts descended into Vortex Spring over 36 consecutive days. Among them was Ed Sorensen, a legendary cave diver who had personally executed hundreds of body recoveries from underwater cave systems. Jill Heinerth, one of the most accomplished cave explorers alive, also contributed to the effort. They mapped the entire system. They pushed into passages so narrow they had to remove their tanks and slide them ahead to squeeze through. They checked every crevice, every dead end, every silt-covered depression where a body could conceivably settle. They found 2 things. First, Ben's 2 decompression stage tanks sitting just outside the entrance to the restricted zone. Strangely, the tanks were filled with regular air, not the specialized gas mixtures that deep cave diving requires. Second, absolutely nothing else. No body, no equipment, no fins, no mask, no wetsuit fragments, no disturbed silt, no scrape marks on the rock walls, no biological matter of any kind. 36 days, 16 of the best cave divers on Earth, a contained, enclosed, finite underwater space. And the conclusion from every single one of them was the same. Ben McDaniel is not in this cave. But he went in. People watched him go in. So where is he? Let's walk through the theories, because every single one of them has a fatal flaw. Start with the obvious. Ben drowned in the cave. He was uncertified. He was using the wrong gas mixture. Regular air at depth causes nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity. It impairs your judgment, makes you reckless, and can kill you. Ben was in over his head. He panicked, got stuck, and died. That's the logical answer. And it has one massive disqualifying problem. There is no body. Bodies don't disappear in underwater caves. The physics don't allow it. Cave systems are closed environments with minimal current. A drowned diver stays where? They die. They don't float away. They don't get swept out to sea. They sit on the bottom or wedge into the rock, and they stay there until someone pulls them out. That's what happens in every single cave diving fatality, except this one. And Ben wasn't small. 6'1", 210. The recovery divers specifically noted that it would be virtually impossible for someone his size to wedge himself into an unexplored crevice so deeply that he'd be invisible. He'd get physically stuck in a highly visible manner long before he could hide himself from view. The cave simply isn't big enough to lose a 210-pound man. All right, So if he's not in the cave, maybe he was never really in the cave. Maybe the dive was theater. Maybe Ben used Vortex Spring as a stage to fake his own death and disappear. Think about the motive. He owed the IRS millions. His business had imploded. His marriage was over. His brother was dead. He was living off his parents' money with no career and no path forward. If you wanted to vanish and leave all of that behind, staging. A drowning in a notoriously dangerous cave is a brilliant cover. Nobody questions it. The cave killed him. Case closed. But here's the thing. When police searched Ben's truck, they found his wallet, his ID, his cell phone, and nearly $700 in cash. If you're faking your death to start over, you need money and identification. You don't leave both in your truck. And then there's the dog. Everyone who knew Ben said the same thing. He loved that dog more than almost anything. He would not have abandoned it to starve in an empty apartment as part of an escape plan. You don't do that to an animal you love, not if you have a choice. So he didn't drown in the cave, and he didn't fake his death, which leaves the third option. Someone killed him. If Ben surfaced from his dive and was murdered on the property, it would explain why the cave is empty. He got out, but the surface evidence doesn't support it. His truck was untouched. There were no signs of a struggle anywhere on the property. No blood, no drag marks, no witnesses reported anything unusual that night. And then there's the detail that makes your skin crawl. The owner of Vortex Spring at the time of Ben's disappearance was awaiting trial for the kidnapping and assault of a temporary employee. That owner later died under highly suspicious circumstances shortly after Ben vanished. That's not proof of anything, but it's the kind of coincidence that keeps investigators awake at night. 3 theories. 3 dead ends. A man who went into a cave and isn't in the cave. A man who couldn't have faked his death because he left behind his money, his ID, and his dog. A man who couldn't have been murdered on the surface because there's not a shred of evidence that it happened. The case became an obsession. The McDaniel family offered a $30,000 reward for the recovery of Ben's body. In 2012, a diver named Larry Higginbotham went into the deepest, most dangerous section of the Vortex Spring Cave to claim that reward. He never came back out. The cave that wouldn't give up Ben McDaniel took another life trying. Today, the case remains officially open. No body has been recovered. No credible sighting of Ben alive has ever surfaced. The cave has been searched by the best in the world and declared empty. The surface has been investigated and declared clean. Every avenue of inquiry leads to the same impossible conclusion. A 210-pound man entered a contained, finite, sealed underwater space and ceased to exist. On the surface, Vortex Spring is still a beautiful place. Crystal clear water, families swimming on sunny afternoons, kids jumping off the dock. Below that, past the gate, past the sign with the Grim Reaper, past the point where the light gives out and the rock closes in, there's a darkness that swallowed a man whole and refuses to give him back. Whether Ben McDaniel is entombed somewhere in the stone, or whether he walked out of that water and into the Florida night, Vortex Spring is keeping his secret. And after 15 years, it shows no sign of letting go. Picture the most ordinary morning you can imagine. It's May 11th, 2011. Spring in Aurora, Illinois. The trees are green, the air is warm, and the parking lot at Greenman Elementary School is doing what it does every single weekday morning, crawling with minivans, half-asleep parents, and kids with backpacks too big for their bodies. James Pitson pulls up to the drop-off line. His 6-year-old son, Timothy, is in the back seat. Timothy is the kind of kid you remember. Super smart, high energy, funny. His dad described him as having this chubby old man waddle when he ran. He loved Matchbox cars, Hot Wheels, the Chicago Blackhawks, and his Spider-Man backpack went everywhere with him. He was 6. He was happy. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. James watches his son walk into the school. He drives to work, and that is the last time James Pitson ever sees his boy. Now, Timothy's mother, Amy Fry Pitson, is 43 years old. She's been battling severe depression for years. She'd been hospitalized for it before. But on this particular morning, everything seemed fine. There were no warning signs, no frantic calls, no goodbye letters, just a normal Tuesday in May. Except it wasn't. Between 8:10 and 8:15 that morning, roughly 30 minutes after James dropped Timothy off, Amy walks into Greenman Elementary. She approaches the front desk and tells them there's a family emergency. She needs to take her son home immediately. The school releases Timothy into her care. No questions asked, no verification call too. The father. She walks out with him, and just like that, a 6-year-old boy is removed from the last place anyone can account for him. But here's where it gets strange. Amy doesn't take Timothy home. She doesn't drive to a hospital. She doesn't call James. Instead, she drops her SUV, a 2004 Ford Expedition, at a mechanic in LaGrange to get it serviced. While the car's being worked on, she takes Timothy to the Brookfield Zoo. They look at animals. They eat snacks. It's a fun day out. Then they pick up the car and start driving. Over the next 3 days, Amy and Timothy go on what can only be described as a dream vacation for a 6-year-old boy. They visit the Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurnee, Illinois, a massive indoor water park. They drive north to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, another sprawling water park and family resort. CCTV footage from these locations shows them together, looking completely normal. Timothy is playing. Amy is smiling. There is nothing, not a single frame of footage, not a single witness account that suggests anything is wrong. Think about that for a second. If you are a mother planning something terrible, why do you spend 3 days building the happiest memories your child has ever had? Why the water parks? Why the zoo? Why the laughter? On May 13th, at approximately 10 a.m., Amy and Timothy check out of the Kalahari Resort. Security cameras capture them leaving together. This is the last verified image of Timothy Pitson alive. He's 6 years old, walking through a hotel lobby next to his mom, probably thinking about the next adventure. Around noon that same day, Amy makes a few phone calls to family members. She tells them everything is fine, she and Timothy are having a great time. During one of those calls, you can hear Timothy in the background. He's complaining that he's hungry. That's it. A hungry 6-year-old in the back of an SUV. Alive, audible, real. And then, silence. Back in Aurora, James is frantic. He hasn't been able to reach Amy. The school told him Timothy was pulled out days ago. Nobody knows where they are. He contacts the police and a full-scale search begins. That evening, something shifts. Amy is spotted alone on security cameras. At 7:30 p.m., she's at a Family Dollar in Winnebago, Illinois, buying writing materials, a pen, a notepad. Later, she's seen at a Sullivan's grocery store. She is completely by herself. No Timothy, no Spider-Man backpack bouncing along behind her. At 11:15 p.m., Amy checks into the Rockford Inn Motel, alone. The next day, May 14th, at approximately 12:30 p.m., housekeeping finds Amy Fry Pitson dead in her room. She has taken her own life, slashed her wrists and neck, combined with an overdose of antihistamines. Timothy is gone, but she left something behind. A note. The suicide note Amy left in that Rockford motel room is one of the most haunting documents in modern missing persons history. She apologized for the mess. She said she was sorry for the pain she was about to cause. And then she wrote the words that have defined this case for over a decade. Timothy is safe. He is with people who love him and will care for him. And the final line, you will never find him. That note is either the last act of a desperate mentally ill mother trying to protect her child from a custody battle she was terrified of losing, or it is the cruelest lie ever written. And after more than a decade of investigation, nobody can tell you which one it is. Let's slow down. Let's actually look at what we know and what doesn't add up, because both of the prevailing theories about what happened to Timothy Pitson have enormous gaping holes in them. Start with the handoff theory. This is the hopeful one. Amy's note says Timothy is safe, that she gave him to people who will love him. Okay. Who? Police dismantled her entire life. They went through every phone record, every email, every text message, every financial transaction. They interviewed every friend, Every family member, every acquaintance. Nobody knew anything. Nobody had been asked to take a child. Nobody had received a child. Now, think about the logistics of this. You cannot hand a 6-year-old American boy to a group of strangers and have that child simply vanish from the face of the earth. Not in 2011. Not in a country with social security numbers, school enrollment records, pediatric dental files, and mandatory vaccination records. A child needs to eat, to sleep, to see a doctor. A child grows, a child talks. If Timothy was handed to a family, that family would need to create an entirely fictional identity for him, birth certificate, school records, the works, and maintain that fiction perfectly for over a decade without a single crack. That's not difficult, that's essentially impossible. Some investigators floated the idea of an Amish or off-grid community. Amy's SUV was traced through rural areas of northwestern Illinois, near communities that live largely outside mainstream society. But even insular communities aren't invisible, and a blonde, English-speaking 6-year-old showing up out of nowhere would raise questions even in the most isolated setting. All right, so let's look at the other theory, the dark one, the one nobody wants to be true. Maybe the note was a lie. Maybe Amy, in the depths of a catastrophic mental health crisis, harmed Timothy and then took her own life. Perpetrators of family annihilation often frame their actions as protection. They convince themselves the child is safe because they've spared them from a world they view as threatening. Amy was terrified of losing custody. She'd told people she would never let that happen. In that psychological framework, "you will never find him" isn't a promise of safety. It's a taunt. But here's the thing. If Amy harmed Timothy, where is he? Forensic teams analyzed the soil and mineral deposits on the undercarriage of her SUV. They found an uncommon mineral called anhydrite, along with traces of specific wildflowers, Queen Anne's lace, black mustard, that pointed to a nearly treeless grassy meadow near a gravel road in northwestern Illinois. They narrowed it down to a shockingly specific environmental profile. And despite having what amounts to a microscopic GPS coordinate, they have never found the location. They've searched extensively, nothing. And then there's the backpack. Timothy's clothes, his toys, his beloved Spider-Man backpack, all of it was missing from the SUV in the motel room. Every single personal item belonging to that child was gone. Now, ask yourself this. If a mother in a psychotic break does the unthinkable to her child in a rural field, does she then carefully collect his backpack, his clothing, and his favorite toys, drive them somewhere else, and dispose of them separately? That is not the behavior of someone in crisis. That is the behavior of someone executing a plan. And it's the single detail that keeps the handoff theory alive, because it suggests Timothy left with his things, as if he was going somewhere. And finally, there's the timeline gap. Between the last CCTV sighting of Amy and Timothy at the Kalahari Resort at 10 a.m. on May 13th and Amy checking into the Rockford Inn alone at 11:15 p.m. that same night, there are roughly 13 hours completely unaccounted for. 13 hours. A woman driving a Ford Expedition with a 6-year-old boy in a region crawling with gas stations, convenience stores, and traffic. Cameras doesn't just turn invisible for 13 hours. She went somewhere. She did something. She met someone, or she didn't. And we have absolutely no idea which. Her cell phone, which could have filled in that gap, was not found at the motel. It vanished along with Timothy. 2 years later, in 2013, it was discovered on the side of Route 78. It yielded nothing useful. The digital trail, the one thing that might have answered everything, was deliberately severed. In April 2019, 8 years after Timothy disappeared, a teenager showed up in Newport, Kentucky. He was shaking. He told police he'd just escaped from 2 men who had been holding him captive for years, and he said his name was Timothy Pitson. For one breathless, agonizing day, the Pitson family allowed themselves to hope. News outlets went into a frenzy. The nation held its breath. And then the DNA results came back. The teenager was not Timothy. He was a 23-year-old man from Ohio with a history of mental illness and fraud. He had fabricated the entire story. The cruelest hoax imaginable, inflicted on a family that had already lost everything. Today, Timothy Pitson would be 20 years old. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children periodically releases age-progressed images showing what he might look like now, a young man with brown hair and a face shaped by a childhood no one witnessed. His father still searches. The FBI still considers the case active. The soil analysis still points to a meadow in Illinois that nobody can find. And the note still sits in an evidence file somewhere. A mother's final chilling promise, written on a motel notepad with a pen she bought at a Family Dollar the night before. You will never find him. So far, she's been right. There's a stretch of road outside Luling, Texas called Salt Flat Road. During the day, it's nothing special. A dusty, unpaved track cutting through flat, scrubby ranchland. The kind of road you'd pass without a second thought. But at midnight, in December, with no streetlights, no houses, no cell signal, and the temperature dropping toward freezing, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes the kind of place where the darkness feels physical. Where the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. Where the only light for miles is whatever your headlights carve out of the black. On the night of December 13th, 2020, a 21-year-old college kid's car ended up wrecked on that road. The engine was still running. The headlights were still cutting through the fog. The keys were in the ignition. But the driver was gone. And scattered along the dirt road, leading away from the crash and into the darkness, was a trail of his clothing. This is the disappearance of Jason Landry. And nothing about it makes sense. Jason Landry was a junior at Texas State University in San Marcos, 21 years old, 6'1", about 170 pounds, with medium-length brown hair and a goatee. By every account, he was a completely normal college student, an avid gamer, well-liked by his friends, close with his family. It was the end of the fall semester, a couple of weeks before Christmas, and Jason was doing what tens of thousands of Texas college kids do every December, packing up his stuff and driving home for winter break. His family lived in Missouri City, a suburb on the southwest side of Houston. The drive from San Marcos is roughly 2.5 hours, almost entirely on well-lit, well-traveled highways. It's a straight shot down I-35, then onto 130 or 80 toward Houston. Jason had made this drive before. He knew the route. There was nothing complicated about it. At 10:55 p.m. on Sunday, December 13th, Jason left his apartment. He loaded up his car, a Nissan Altima, with his backpack, his laptop, his gaming equipment, a bag of toiletries, and the usual stuff you bring home for the holidays. He plugged Missouri City into Waze and pulled onto the road. A completely routine departure on a completely routine night. For the first hour or so, everything tracked exactly as expected. His phone pinged cell towers along the standard route. He was heading southeast, making normal progress. And then, somewhere around Luling, Texas, something changed. Instead of staying on the highway, Jason's route diverted. His digital footprint shows him turning off the main road and funneling deep into the rural grid south of Luling, a maze of unpaved county roads with no lights, no traffic, and no reason for a college kid heading to Houston to be anywhere near them. He ended up on Salt Flat Road, a desolate gravel track running through absolute nothing. Why? That's the first question, and nobody has a good answer. Was Waze glitching, sending him down some bizarre shortcut to save 3 minutes? Did he intentionally leave the highway, maybe to pull over, maybe to smoke the marijuana that was later found in his car? Did something happen on the highway that made him exit? Was someone following him? We don't know. All we know is that a kid who was supposed to be cruising down a well-lit interstate was instead bouncing down a pitch-black dirt road in the middle of rural Texas just after midnight. And then, he crashed. Sometime around midnight, just barely into December 14th, Jason's Nissan Altima was involved in a single-vehicle collision near 2365 Salt Flat Road. The rear end took heavy damage, spinning the car out. Exactly how it happened isn't clear. There's no guardrail, no intersection, no obvious obstacle. Just a wrecked car on a dirt road in the dark. A volunteer firefighter happened to be driving down that same remote stretch shortly after and spotted the wreck. He pulled over. The scene was eerie. The Altima was still running. The headlights were on, cutting white beams into the fog and dust. The keys were dangling from the ignition. The front passenger door was locked. Jason's backpack was still inside. His laptop, his gaming equipment, his toiletries, a usable amount of marijuana. Everything was there. Everything except Jason. When police arrived and began processing the scene, they found something that turned a car accident into a full-blown mystery. Leading away from the crash, scattered along the dark dirt road, was a trail of Jason's clothing. His shirt, his shorts, his socks, his underwear, his watch, his slide sandals, just lying in the dirt one after another, like breadcrumbs leading into the void. Think about that image. A freezing December night, a wrecked car still running on a road with no lights and no people for miles, and a young man's clothing peeled off piece by piece, trailing away from the vehicle and into the Texas brush. No blood on the clothes, no signs of a physical struggle, just garments, carefully removed and discarded, leading into absolute darkness. And beyond that trail of clothing, nothing, no footprints, no blood, no body. The landscape just swallowed him. Let's look at the theories, because every explanation for what happened to Jason Landry has a problem. The leading theory, the one most investigators lean toward, is hypothermia and something called paradoxical undressing. This is a real, well-documented medical phenomenon. When the human body reaches a certain stage of severe hypothermia, the blood vessels near the skin suddenly dilate. The result is a massive, overwhelming sensation of burning heat. Freezing people rip off their clothes because their dying brain is telling them they're on fire. It's one of the cruelest tricks the human body can play on itself, and it's been documented in cold weather deaths around the world. So the theory goes like this. Jason hits his head in the crash. He's disoriented, possibly concussed. He stumbles out of the car into the freezing night. Hypothermia sets in. His brain misfires. He strips off his clothes and wanders into the brush, where he collapses and dies of exposure. It's clean. It's logical. And it has serious problems. First, the temperature. It was cold that night, near freezing. But was it cold enough, fast enough, to trigger paradoxical undressing within what would have been minutes of the crash? This phenomenon typically occurs in the late stages of severe hypothermia after prolonged exposure. Jason had just been sitting in a heated car. His core temperature would have been normal. For paradoxical undressing to kick in that quickly, on a night that was cold but not Arctic, stretches the medical timeline considerably. Second, and this is the big one, why did he leave the car? The engine was running, the heater worked, the keys were in the ignition. If you've just been in a crash and you're disoriented and cold, the car is your survival pod. It's shelter, warmth, and a beacon for anyone driving by. You don't walk away from that. You especially don't walk away from that into pitch-black nothingness on a road you've never been on before. A concussed, confused person might stumble out of a car, but they don't typically march hundreds of feet down a road, methodically removing clothing as they go. Third, the searches. If Jason died of exposure within walking distance of his car, his body should have been found. The Caldwell County Sheriff's Office, the Texas Rangers, and the Attorney General's Cold Case Unit threw everything at this. Search dogs and thermal drones, helicopters, grid searches on foot. They drained ponds. They crawled through brush. They covered a massive radius around the crash site. A 170-pound man doesn't just dissolve. And yet beyond the scattered clothing, they found absolutely nothing. No remains, no additional belongings, no trace. All right. So what about foul play? Maybe someone ran Jason off the road. Maybe he was being chased and the crash wasn't an accident but the result of someone forcing him into the ditch. That would explain why he abandoned a perfectly functional vehicle. He wasn't confused, he was terrified. He was running. The clothes? Maybe they came off in a struggle or he shed them while sprinting through brush to make himself harder to grab. But here's the thing. Investigators found zero evidence of a second vehicle at the scene. No foreign paint transfer on the Altima, no secondary tire tracks in the dirt, no signs of a physical altercation on the clothing itself, no tears, no blood, no defensive marks. The clothes were removed, not torn off, and the watch and underwear were among the items found on the road. You don't politely remove your watch and your underwear while fighting for your life. That's not flight behavior. That's something else. And then there's the locked door. The front passenger door was locked. If someone had pulled Jason from the car, why lock a door behind you? If Jason locked it himself before fleeing, that implies a moment of deliberate thought, which contradicts both the concussion theory and the panic theory. A man in the grip of hypothermic psychosis or running for his life does not stop to lock a car door. Every explanation requires you to ignore at least one piece of evidence that directly contradicts it. That's what makes this case so maddening. In the years since Jason Landry vanished, the investigation has never stopped. The case was escalated to the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit. Advanced forensic testing has been conducted, search warrants have been executed, aerial drones have mapped the terrain in granular detail. His family has organized volunteer searches, walked the brush themselves, and begged the public for any scrap of information. None of it has produced a single additional clue. Jason Landry left his college apartment on a Sunday night in December to drive home for Christmas. He had his backpack, his laptop, his games, all the things a 21-year-old brings home for winter break. Somewhere between San Marcos and Houston, he turned off the highway, ended up on a road he had no reason to be on, wrecked his car, and walked into the freezing Texas darkness, leaving a trail of his own clothing behind him, like a message nobody can read. The car was still running, the headlights were still on, his belongings were still on the seat, and the road stretched out in both directions, empty, unlit, and silent. A routine drive home for Christmas became a modern ghost story. And somewhere out there, past the edge of what the headlights could reach, the answer disappeared with him. South Street in Philadelphia on a Saturday night is not a quiet place. It's one of the city's loudest, most packed entertainment strips. A neon-lit corridor of bars, restaurants, tattoo parlors, and corner shops crammed with people looking for a good time. On any given weekend night, thousands of people are walking these sidewalks, spilling out of doorways, hailing cabs, double parking, arguing over where to eat. There are cars everywhere. There are people everywhere. It is, by any definition, one of the last places on Earth where you'd expect someone to quietly disappear. On the night of February 19th, 2005, it was a chilly Saturday evening. Cold but clear, the kind of winter night where you zip your jacket up but still go out. South Street was doing its thing. The bars were packed, the sidewalks were full. And somewhere in that crowd, two people walked out of a bar, got into a truck, and drove into a void so complete that 20 years of FBI investigation has failed to recover a single fragment of metal, a single bone, or a single answer. This is the disappearance of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone. And it's not just the people who vanished. It's the truck. Danielle Imbo was 34. She was a mortgage processor living in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, sharp, warm, outgoing, and by every account utterly devoted to her young son. She was separated from her husband, Joe Imbo, and actively working toward buying a home with a yard for her kid. She was taking professional classes. She was building a future. Everything about her life was pointed forward. Richard Petrone was 35, a lifelong South Philly guy, deeply rooted in his neighborhood, working at his family's bakery. He was 5'9", solidly built, a blue collar worker with tattoos and an uncomplicated life centered entirely around his tween daughter. He was a dedicated solo dad. His kid was his world. Danielle and Rich had an on-again, off-again thing. They'd dated before, drifted apart, and on this particular Saturday night, they were testing the waters again, meeting up with another couple for drinks at Abilene's, a popular bar and restaurant at 429 South Street. It was casual. It was fun. Nothing about the evening suggested it would be their last. And here's the detail that the FBI and every behavioral analyst who's touched this case will tell you flat out. Neither Danielle nor Rich would have voluntarily abandoned their children. Not for each other, not for money, not for anything. Every psychological metric, every interview with friends and family, every behavioral profile points to the same conclusion. These were parents whose kids were the center of their universe. Whatever happened to them, they didn't choose it. The evening unfolded exactly the way 1,000 other Saturday nights on South Street unfold. Danielle had dinner earlier with her mother, Rich's mother, and some friends. Afterward, she was driven to meet Rich at a bar. He suggested they head to Abilene's to meet up with another couple. They did. Witnesses and bar staff described the group as relaxed, happy, having a normal time. There were zero signs of tension, fear, or anything out of the ordinary. Just 4 people having drinks on a Saturday night. At approximately 11:45 p.m., the evening wrapped up. Danielle and Rich said their goodbyes and walked out of Abilene's. They headed down South Street toward where Rich had parked his vehicle, a 2001 Dodge Dakota pickup truck, black over silver, Pennsylvania plates YFH-2319. It's not a small vehicle. A Dodge Dakota is a mid-sized truck that weighs roughly 4,000 pounds. It's the kind of thing you notice on a city street. They got into the truck. They pulled away. And from that exact moment, from the instant that truck left its parking spot on a crowded Philadelphia street, Danielle Imbo, Richard Petrone, and the Dodge Dakota ceased to exist. No cell phone pings after 11:45, no credit card charges, no bank withdrawals, no toll booth records, no traffic camera hits, no gas station receipts, no witness sightings of the truck on any road, in any neighborhood, in any direction. Nothing. 2 human beings in a 4,000-pound pickup truck vanished as cleanly as if they'd been erased from a photograph. The next day, Danielle missed a scheduled hair appointment. That was the first crack. She wasn't answering her phone. Rich wasn't answering his. Their families started calling each other, then calling hospitals, then calling the police. Within days, the FBI was involved, and the case escalated into a sprawling multi-state investigation that has now consumed 2 decades and produced exactly 0 physical evidence. Let me say that again, because it's the single most staggering fact in this entire case. In 20 years of federal investigation, not one piece of the Dodge Dakota has been found. Not a license plate, not a door handle, not a bolt, not a fragment of taillight plastic. A 4,000-pound truck made of steel and glass and rubber has been missing for 2 decades in one of the most densely populated regions in America. That is not supposed to be possible. Let's go through the theories, because every single one of them requires you to accept something that borders on absurd. The first theory, and the most common one when a vehicle goes missing, is that they crashed into a body of water. Philadelphia sits between the Delaware River and the Schuylkill River. Maybe Rich was driving, missed a turn, hit a patch of ice in the truck, went off an embankment into the river. It happens. Cars end up in water all the time, and sometimes they aren't found for years. But here's the thing. A Dodge Dakota doesn't quietly slip into a river like a kayak. It's a 4,000-pound truck. It would shatter a guardrail. It would leave skid marks. It would create an oil slick on the surface, and the surrounding waterways have been searched aggressively. Over the past 2 decades, specialized dive teams, including Adventures with Purpose, a renowned underwater search and recovery group, have conducted advanced sonar sweeps of the Delaware River, the Schuylkill River, Strawbridge Lake, and Cooper River Lake. High-resolution sonar mapping across a 5-mile radius of every probable waterway. The signature of a mid-sized pickup truck on a sonar screen is unmistakable. They found nothing. The truck is not in the water. All right, so maybe they ran away. Maybe Danielle and Rich, caught up in a rekindled romance, decided to leave everything behind and start over somewhere together. A dramatic, impulsive love story. Except it's not a love story. It's an impossibility. Both of them left behind their children, young children who were the documented center of their lives. Danielle left uncashed paychecks. Rich left his entire daily routine, his family bakery, his neighborhood. Neither took money. Neither packed a bag. Neither made a single financial transaction after 11:45 p.m. on February 19, 2005. Not a withdrawal, not a purchase, not a phone call. For 20 years. You don't start a new life with no money, no ID, and no plan. And you especially don't do it if it means your toddler wakes up the next morning and you're simply not there anymore. Every person who knew them says the same thing. It didn't happen. It couldn't have, which brings us to the theory the FBI leans toward. And it's the darkest one. Federal investigators have publicly stated, on the record repeatedly, that they believe specific people in the South Philadelphia community know exactly what happened to Danielle and Rich. They call it the South Philly Secret. The neighborhood, investigators say, operates more like a small town than a city block. There are deep loyalties, old grudges, and a code of silence that has held firm for 2 decades. The prevailing FBI theory is murder for hire. Suspicion circled Danielle's estranged husband, Joe Imbo, though he has never been charged. A separate investigative thread focused on a man named Robert Carey, an alleged pill ring operator in the Kensington neighborhood who was widely rumored to work as an underground hitman. Carey hanged himself in a federal prison cell in 2010, reportedly leaving behind a cryptic suicide note. Whatever he knew died with him. But even if the murder for hire theory is correct, even if a professional killer intercepted Danielle and Rich that night, you still have to explain the truck. And this is where the theory crosses from plausible into almost supernatural levels of execution. Think about the logistics. You're on South Street in downtown Philadelphia on a packed Saturday night. You have to ambush 2 people, one of them a stocky, physically capable man, as they enter or sit inside a vehicle. You have to do this without a single witness on a street crowded with hundreds of people. You then have to dispose of 2 bodies and a 4,000-pound truck so thoroughly that 20 years of federal resources, advanced sonar, forensic accounting, and informant networks can't turn up a single piece of either. The FBI's working theory is that the truck was driven directly into a mob-affiliated chop shop, an underground garage where stolen vehicles are dismantled into untraceable parts within hours. It would explain why no fragment of the Dakota has ever surfaced. The truck wasn't hidden, it was destroyed, ground into components and scattered across a supply chain that doesn't keep receipts. It's the most plausible explanation. It's also a criminal magic trick of staggering precision. No noise, no witnesses, no forensic trace, no confession in 20 years. An impending blizzard hit Philadelphia the very next night. Heavy snow, freezing rain, winds over 35 miles per hour, blanketing the city and destroying whatever fragile evidence might have been left on the streets. Whether that timing was luck or planning, it was devastating. The FBI has essentially admitted they are stuck. They've said publicly that they believe the answers exist inside the heads of people who refuse to talk. The reward stands at over $100,000. It has never been claimed. The code of silence holds. Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone walked out of a bar on one of the busiest streets in Philadelphia on a Saturday night. They got into a truck that weighs 2 tons. They drove away. And then they and the truck were swallowed by the earth. No bodies, no vehicle, no crime scene, no witnesses, no digital trail, no confession. 2 people and a massive pickup truck erased from existence in the middle of a major American city on a night when thousands of people were within shouting distance. A fun night out on South Street turned into one of the most flawless, terrifying, vanishing acts in true crime history. And somewhere in South Philadelphia, someone knows exactly how it was done. And they've kept that secret for 20 years. An elementary school on a Friday morning is one of the loudest, most chaotic, most supervised environments on Earth. You've got kids running in every direction, teachers stationed at every doorway, parents clustered in hallways with coffee cups and cameras. There are sign-in sheets and front desks and volunteer name tags. It is, by design, the one place in America where a child is supposed to be completely, absolutely safe. On the morning of June 4th, 2010, Skyline Elementary School in the West Hills of Portland, Oregon, was even more hectic than usual. The school was hosting its annual science fair, a sprawling event that had transformed the hallways into a maze of tri-fold poster boards, papier-mâché volcanoes, and hand-painted solar systems. Parents were everywhere. Kids were everywhere. The building was buzzing with the kind of wholesome, slightly overwhelming energy that defines public school events. Outside, the weather was classic Pacific Northwest, overcast, misty, temperatures in the mid-50s with a light rain falling. The school sits in an affluent, heavily wooded neighborhood where the dense Oregon forest presses right up against the edge of the campus. On a clear day, the trees are beautiful. On a gray, foggy morning, they form a dark, wet wall that starts about 50 feet from the playground. Somewhere inside that crowded, supervised, chaotic building, a 7-year-old boy walked down a hallway and vanished. Not later that day, not after school, not on the walk home. He disappeared from inside the building during the busiest event of the school year, surrounded by hundreds of people. His name was Kyron Horman, and 15 years later, nobody can explain how it happened. Kyron Richard Horman was 7 years old and in the 2nd grade. He had sandy blonde hair, bright eyes, and thick wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a miniature professor. He was a sweet kid, curious, enthusiastic, the kind of boy who got genuinely excited about a school project. His family situation was complicated in the way a lot of modern families are. His biological father, Caney Horman, was a methodical, detail-oriented engineer at Intel. His stepmother, Terry Horman, was Caney's 2nd wife. They had an infant daughter, together. Kyron's biological mother, Desiree Young, shared custody and was a fierce, active presence in his life, even while battling serious medical issues, including kidney failure. On the morning of June 4th, Kyron was wearing a black t-shirt with CSI printed across the front. In the cruelest irony imaginable, the kid who vanished without a forensic trace was wearing a shirt advertising a show about solving crimes with forensic evidence. He was carrying a science fair project about the red-eyed tree frog, and he was proud of it. His stepmother, Terry, drove him to school that morning. She also had the couple's infant daughter in the car. They arrived around 8:15 a.m., walked through the packed hallways, set up his exhibit, and toured the other projects together. At 8:45 a.m., Terry took a photograph of Kyron standing in front of his red-eyed tree frog display. He's smiling in the photo. His glasses are slightly crooked. He looks exactly like what he was, a happy 7-year-old at a school science fair. That photograph is one of the most reproduced images in modern true crime. It's the last confirmed image of Kyron Horman. According to Terry, here's what happened next. Shortly after taking the photo, the school bell rang. Terry says she watched Kyron walk down a busy hallway toward his classroom. She saw him heading in the right direction, turned around, and left the building with the baby. That's it. That's her account. She watched him walk away, and she left. Terry then ran errands. She stopped at 2 different Fred Meyer grocery stores. She claims she spent part of the late morning driving her infant daughter around on rural roads near Highway 30, using the motion of the car to soothe the baby's earache. Between 11:39 a.m. and 12:40 p.m., she checked into a 24-hour fitness gym in Beaverton. By 1:21 p.m., she was back at the family home, uploading the morning science fair photos to Facebook. Completely normal behavior for a completely normal day. At 3:30 p.m., the afternoon school bus pulled up to the Horman family's designated stop. Kyron wasn't on it. Terry called the school. The school checked their records and delivered the news that would detonate everything. Kyron had been marked absent by his teacher for the entire day. He never walked into his classroom that morning. He never sat down at his desk. He was never there. Between 8:45 a.m., when Terry took his photo, and 9 a.m., when class started and attendance was taken, Kyron Horman disappeared. A 15-minute window inside a school during a science fair, surrounded by hundreds of people. The 911 call triggered what would become the largest, most expensive criminal investigation in Oregon's history. Let's go through the possibilities. And let's be honest about the problems with every single one of them. Start with stranger abduction. A predator slips into the school during the chaos of the science fair, spots Kyron, and somehow lures or grabs him. It's the nightmare scenario every parent imagines. And in theory, the science fair created the perfect cover. Unfamiliar adults walking through hallways wouldn't necessarily raise alarms when the school was already full of visiting parents. But let's actually think about the logistics. You have a building full of teachers, parents, and staff. The hallways are packed. A stranger would need to isolate a 7-year-old boy, convince or force him to leave the building, walk him past dozens of potential witnesses, get him into a vehicle, and drive away. All without Kyron making a sound, without a single adult noticing something wrong, and without any of the school's exterior cameras capturing it. Kyron was 7, not 2. A 7-year-old who's being grabbed by a stranger kicks. He screams, he fights, and he does it in a hallway where someone is standing every 15 feet. The geometry of a stranger abduction from inside that building on that morning is extraordinarily difficult to make work. All right, what about wandering off? Skyline Elementary backs up against dense Pacific Northwest forest. Maybe Kyron, excited from the science fair, decided to explore. Maybe he walked out a side door and into the woods. Kids do impulsive things, it's not impossible. Except for the search. The response to Kyron's disappearance was immediate and massive. Hundreds of volunteers, tracking dogs, thermal imaging helicopters, professional search and rescue teams combing the forest grid by grid. If a 7-year-old wandered into those woods, dogs would have hit his scent trail within hours. Searchers would have found a shoe, a scrap of clothing, a footprint in the mud, something. They found absolutely nothing. No scent trail, no physical trace. The forest didn't swallow Karan Horman. He was never in it. Which brings us to where the investigation inevitably, relentlessly focused. Terry Horman. Terry was the last known person to see Kyron alive. That alone puts her under a microscope. But the evidence that piled up around her goes far beyond proximity. First, the witnesses. Multiple independent people told law enforcement they saw a woman matching Terry's description leading Kyron out of the school building and toward her truck that morning, not watching him walk to class, leading him out. Second, the cell phone data. Terry claimed she spent part of the morning driving rural roads to soothe her baby's earache, but cell tower records reportedly pinged her phone near Sauvie Island, a remote, marshy agricultural area that she had initially either omitted from her account or denied visiting. There's a roughly 90-minute window between 10:10 a.m. and 11:39 a.m. where Terry's movements cannot be independently verified by anyone other than Terry. Third, the polygraphs. Terry failed 2 separate polygraph examinations conducted by law enforcement regarding her knowledge of Kyron's whereabouts. She then refused to take a third. Polygraphs aren't admissible in court and they're not infallible, but failing 2 and refusing a third is not the behavior of someone with nothing to hide. And then there's the bombshell. Weeks into the investigation, law enforcement approached Caney Horman with devastating information. Rodolfo Sanchez, the family's longtime landscaper, testified under oath in a deposition that Terry had approached him in January 2010, 5 months before Kyron vanished, and offered him money to murder Caney, her own husband, the father of her infant daughter. She wanted him dead. Let that register. 5 months before her stepson disappeared, Terry Horman allegedly tried to hire someone to kill the boy's father, and then the boy vanished from her care. But here's where it gets complicated. If Terry harmed Kyron that morning, the timeline is brutally tight. She left the school, went to 2 grocery stores, on camera, drove around rural roads, went to the gym, and was home posting photos to Facebook by early afternoon. Somewhere in that sequence, she would have had to do something to a 7-year-old boy and dispose of every trace of evidence so thoroughly that 15 years of investigation, grand jury proceedings, and forensic analysis have produced nothing. No body, no crime scene, no DNA, no confession, no indictment. The circumstantial case against Terry Horman is a mountain. The physical evidence is a void. And without a body or a crime scene, the district attorney has never been able to bring charges. Years of secret grand jury proceedings parsed every detail. No indictment was ever issued. Terry Horman has never been arrested. She has never confessed. Kyron's biological mother, Desiree Young, has never stopped searching. She has spent 15 years advocating, investigating, and keeping her son's name in the public eye. Caney Horman divorced Terry within weeks of the disappearance and took custody of their infant daughter. The family fractured along the exact fault lines the investigation exposed. A school is supposed to be the safest place a child can be. It's the one building in America where you drop your kid off in the morning and trust, completely without question, that they'll be standing at the bus stop that afternoon. For Kyron Horman's family, that trust was destroyed in a 15-minute window on a foggy Friday morning. A smiling boy in a CSI shirt, standing proudly next to his science fair project about tree frogs, walked down a busy hallway in a building full of people. And then he stepped right off the face of the earth. The hallway is still there, the school is still there, the forest is still there. But Kieran isn't. And 15 years of looking haven't brought anyone a single step closer to finding him. There's a house on Old Bedford Road in Lincoln, Massachusetts. In 1961, it was a nice house. A Cape Cod-style two-story sitting on a quiet, tree-lined street in one of the safest suburbs in America. The kind of place where you left the front door unlocked when you went to the store. The kind of place where the biggest neighborhood scandal was somebody's dog digging up a flower bed. On the afternoon of October 24th, 1961, a 4-year-old girl walked into that house looking for her mother. She came back out a few minutes later and said something to the neighbor that has haunted investigators for over 6 decades. Mommy is gone, and the kitchen is covered with red paint. It wasn't paint. What happened inside that house that afternoon remains one of the strangest, most forensically contradictory crime scenes in American history. Because Joan Risch didn't just disappear. She left behind a scene that looks like it was designed by someone who'd read a textbook on how to stage a vanishing. And here's the thing, she actually had. To understand this case, you need to understand the world Joan Risch lived in. Lincoln, Massachusetts in 1961 was the American dream distilled into a zip code. This was Kennedy's America. Men wore hats to work. Women kept immaculate homes. The town was so safe, so deeply embedded in its own quiet mythology, that it was being partially preserved as part of the Minuteman National Historical Park. History literally lived on these streets. The Risch family fit the template perfectly. Joan's husband, Martin, was a corporate executive who traveled frequently for business. Joan, 31, was a stay-at-home mother, raising 2 young children, 4-year-old Lillian and 2-year-old David, in a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle. From the outside, everything was exactly as it should have been. But Joan wasn't quite the simple housewife the neighborhood assumed. She was a Wilson College graduate. She was active in the League of Women Voters. She was sharp, well-read, and intellectually restless in the way that a lot of educated women trapped in the domestic expectations of the early 60s were. And she had a hobby that, in hindsight, feels like foreshadowing. Joan Risch was obsessed with true crime. She devoured books about murders, disappearances, and forensic investigations. She checked them out from the library regularly. Remember that detail. It becomes the single most debated piece of evidence in this entire case. October 24th, 1961, was a Tuesday. A completely unremarkable mid-autumn Tuesday. The leaves were turning. The air was crisp, cool enough for a light jacket, warm enough to leave the windows cracked. Martin Risch was away on a business trip, which wasn't unusual. Joan had the kids. That morning, Joan ran through a standard suburban checklist. She had a dentist appointment. She arranged a playdate for Lillian across the street at the Barker residence. 2-year-old David was at home with her, eventually put down for a nap. Everything was completely, boringly normal. Now, this is where the normal part of this story ends. At 2:15 in the afternoon, neighbor Barbara Barker glanced out her window and saw Joan moving quickly up her driveway. Barker described Joan as wearing a trench coat and carrying something red in her outstretched arms, walking rapidly from her car toward the garage. Barker assumed Joan was playing some kind of game, maybe chasing one of the kids. She thought nothing of it. That was the last confirmed sighting of Joan Risch by anyone who knew her. At 3:40 p.m., Barker brought Lillian back to the Risch house. She didn't go inside. She assumed Joan was home, left Lillian at the door, and went back to her own house. At 4:15, Lillian appeared back at the Barker's door. That's when she said it. Mommy is gone and the kitchen is covered with red paint. When the police arrived at roughly 5 p.m., the outside of the house looked perfectly fine. Quiet street, tidy yard, nothing out of place. But the moment they walked through the door, the illusion shattered. The kitchen was a disaster. Blood was smeared across the floor and the walls. A side table had been violently overturned. The wall-mounted telephone had been ripped from its receiver, the cord hanging loose. It looked like a war zone. But here's where the contradictions start piling up. Investigators measured the blood. Total volume, roughly half a pint. Now, half a pint of blood looks absolutely horrifying when it's smeared across a white kitchen floor and splashed on walls. It creates a scene that screams violent struggle. But medically, half a pint is not life-threatening. You could lose that amount and walk away. You'd be dizzy, maybe disoriented, but you'd be alive. So the scene looked far worse than the actual injury suggested. And then there were the things that were missing from the scene. Not a single bloody footprint was found anywhere in the house. Think about that. Blood is all over the floor, on the walls, on the overturned furniture. But nobody stepped in it? Either the person who bled somehow floated above the kitchen, or someone very carefully cleaned the floor of footprints while leaving the rest of the blood untouched. That is not the behavior of a panicked attacker. That's the behavior of someone thinking 3 steps ahead. There was more. Investigators found evidence that someone had attempted to clean the blood using paper towels and, bizarrely, articles of 2-year-old David's clothing. A trail of blood drops led from the kitchen through the house and out to the driveway, where deliberate smears were found on 3 separate areas of Joan's car. Random drops appeared in the children's room, the master bedroom, and on the stairs, suggesting someone had moved erratically through the entire house while bleeding. And where was little David during all of this? Sound asleep in his crib, completely unharmed. Whatever happened in that kitchen, the blood, the overturned table, the ripped phone cord, was apparently quiet enough that a 2-year-old sleeping 1 room away didn't wake up. Now, this is where it gets strange. Really strange. During the investigation, police checked Joan's library records, and what they found turned the entire case on its head. Joan had recently checked out several books that focused explicitly on vanishings, unsolved murders, and forensic evasion. Among them was a novel called Into Thin Air and another called The Screaming Rabbit, both by author Harry Carmichael. Here's why that matters. The plots of these books closely mirrored the exact anomalies found in Joan's kitchen: bloody scenes left behind, people who disappeared without a trace, forensic details that didn't add up. It was as if the crime scene at Old Bedford Road had been modeled on the fiction Joan was consuming. Was Joan Risch using mystery novels as an instruction manual to stage her own disappearance? Let's slow down. Let's look at the facts. Because every single theory about what happened to Joan Risch has a massive gaping hole in it. Start with the staged disappearance. The library books make it look like an open and shut case, right? A bored, intellectually restless housewife reads about vanishings, then executes one herself. Clean, elegant, case closed. But hold on a second. Let's think about what she left behind. Joan didn't take her coat. She didn't take her purse. She didn't take her car. She left her 2 young children, one of them a toddler sleeping in a crib, alone in a house smeared with blood. And here's the critical question. It's 1961. There are no ATMs. There's no digital money. If you are staging a brilliant escape, you need money and transportation. Joan had neither. How do you start a new life with $0, no ID, and no car? You don't. You can't. And in the decades since, no financial trail has ever been found, no withdrawals, no second identity, nothing. If Joan Risch planned the perfect escape, she forgot the 2 most important parts: how to get away and how to stay away. And then there's the children. Every single person who knew Joan described her as a devoted, attentive mother. This was the center of her identity. The idea that she would stage an elaborate bloody vanishing and leave a 2-year-old alone in a house, a child who couldn't feed himself, couldn't call for help, couldn't even open the front door, defies everything we know about her psychology. You don't fake your death and abandon a toddler. That's not escape. That's cruelty. And nobody who knew Joan believed her capable of it. All right, so maybe the books were a coincidence. Maybe Joan was just a true crime enthusiast, like millions of people today, and the similarities between her reading list and her crime scene were a terrible twist of fate. In that case, the simplest explanation would be foul play. An intruder broke in. There was a violent struggle. Joan was taken. But here's the thing. There were no signs of forced entry. None. The doors were intact. The windows were fine. Whoever entered that house either had a key or was let in willingly. And if there was a violent struggle, as the overturned table and ripped phone cord suggest, how did the attacker keep it quiet enough to not wake a sleeping toddler? In the next room, how did they avoid leaving a single bloody footprint while the blood was literally everywhere else? And then there's the witness testimony that makes this even more confusing. Multiple people reported seeing a dazed, disoriented woman matching Joan's description walking along the road near her home later that same afternoon. She appeared to be bleeding. She was alone. She wasn't running. She wasn't screaming for help. She was just walking. If Joan had escaped an attacker, why didn't she run to one of her neighbors? She knew every person on that street. Why didn't she bang on a door and scream? Why did she wander bleeding and silent into the distance? There's one more theory. Some investigators have speculated that Joan may have suffered a sudden medical emergency, a botched procedure, a hemorrhage, some kind of catastrophic physical event that left her bleeding and disoriented. The neighbor. Seeing her carry something red with outstretched arms in the reported sightings of blood on her legs lends some weight to this idea. But does a medical emergency explain the overturned table? Does it explain the phone ripped out of the wall? That's not a woman fainting. That's a struggle. And even if she was hemorrhaging and confused, the erratic movement through the house, blood drops in the children's room, on the stairs, in the bedroom, followed by an attempt to clean up, followed by walking outside and vanishing forever. That is not a medical event. That's something else entirely, something that doesn't fit neatly into any single explanation. 65 years later, not a single trace of Joan Risch has ever been found. No body, no bones, no identification surfacing under an alias, no deathbed confession. Despite the bloody fingerprints in her kitchen, the haunting library records, the bizarre sightings of a bleeding woman walking calmly down a suburban road, nothing. The investigation never produced a suspect. It never produced a motive. It never produced a body. What it produced was a crime scene that contradicts itself at every turn. Too much blood for an escape, not enough for a murder, too clean for a struggle, too violent for an accident, a devoted mother who left her children, a brilliant woman who left without money or a plan. Joan Risch walked out of her perfect suburban life on a crisp October afternoon in 1961, bleeding and dazed, and vanished into history. She left behind a kitchen that looked like a horror movie set, a stack of library books about people who disappeared without a trace, and a 2-year-old son sleeping peacefully through whatever nightmare unfolded around him. The books she borrowed were about vanishings, and then she became one. Nobody has ever been able to explain how. There's a stretch of road in Northern California that runs through the Copiah Valley, cutting between steep ravines and dense, unforgiving brush. Highway 16 winds through Yolo County like a ribbon draped across the spine of the mountains, beautiful in the daylight, completely desolate after dark. Cell service drops in and out. The shoulders are narrow. The nearest town might be 30 minutes away, and the nearest person who'd hear you shout for help might not exist at all. Along this highway sits Cache Creek Regional Park, a remote, rugged wilderness area defined by steep ravines, fast-moving water, and terrain so thick with brush that walking 10 feet off the road can feel like stepping into another world. The lower side parking lot is a flat, gravel clearing surrounded by nothing. It's the kind of place where you pull over because you have to, not because you want to. In October 2014, a black Nissan Maxima was found abandoned in that parking lot. The battery was dead. The hazard lights had drained it. The interior was a mess, papers and CDs tossed everywhere. A pair of massive size 18 shoes sat outside the driver's door. The man who drove that car was 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 300 pounds. He was a former Harlem Globetrotter, a once-in-a-generation athlete, and one of the most physically conspicuous human beings you could ever encounter. And he was gone. Completely, totally, impossibly gone. This is the disappearance of Rico Harris. And nothing about the math adds up. Rico Omar Harris was 37 years old, and he was impossible to miss. At 6'9" and 300 pounds with size 18 shoes, he didn't blend into crowds. He towered over them. He'd been a standout basketball player his entire life, a collegiate star whose talent was once compared to Lamar Odom, good enough to play with the Harlem Globetrotters. He had a tattoo on his left arm that read, "Ballin' for Life," next to an image of a basketball. He was, in every sense, larger than life. But Rico's story wasn't a straight line from talent to success. His athletic career had been derailed by severe chronic alcoholism and drug addiction. For years, those demons consumed him. By the time he reached his mid-30s, he'd lost almost everything the game had given him. And then he started climbing back. By the fall of 2014, Rico was in recovery. He'd met a woman named Jennifer Song, and the relationship had become the anchor of his new life. He was planning to move from Southern California to Seattle to be with her, to start fresh, to leave the wreckage behind. He was talking about getting married. He was talking about a future. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. Rico was in a good place, better than he'd been in years. That's the man who got in his Nissan Maxima and headed north, a giant with a second chance, driving toward the life he'd been fighting to build. On October 8th, Rico did something unexpected. He told Jennifer he was going to explore around Seattle while she was at work. But when she got home, he was gone. He'd left on a sudden, unannounced detour, a 1,000-mile drive south to visit his mother, Margaret, in Alhambra, California. It was impulsive, but not alarming. Rico was close with his mom. He wanted to see her before the big move. He arrived at Margaret's house around 2 a.m. on October 9th. And here's where the first red flag appears. Rico did not sleep. Not a single hour. He was restless, wired, plagued by insomnia. He took his younger brother out for a late meal, hung around the house, but never closed his eyes. His mother noticed. She begged him to rest before. Driving back, he wouldn't. At 10:30 p.m. on October 9th, despite his mother's pleas, Rico got back in the Maxima and started the grueling drive north to Seattle. He had a neighborhood barbecue to attend and a job interview lined up. He was determined to make it. By 8 a.m. on October 10th, Rico called Jennifer from a gas station near Sacramento. She said he sounded exhausted, severely fatigued. At that point, he had been awake for approximately 40 consecutive hours. At 10:44 a.m., Rico left Jennifer a voicemail. His words were vague but not panicked. He said he was driving up into the mountains to rest. At 11:15 a.m., his cell phone either died or was powered off. Rico Harris was never definitively heard from again. 2 days later, on October 12th, a Yolo County Sheriff's deputy on routine patrol spotted Rico's black Nissan Maxima sitting in the lower site parking lot of Cache Creek Regional Park. It was clearly abandoned. The battery was dead from the hazard lights running, and it had been sitting there long enough to attract attention. The interior of the car was a wreck. Papers were scattered across the floorboards. CDs were tossed everywhere. Belongings were strewn haphazardly around the cabin. It looked like the aftermath of either a struggle or a breakdown. But here's the detail that reframes everything. Investigators recovered a video from Rico's cell phone that had been recorded in pitch darkness. In it, Rico is sitting in the driver's seat, apparently unaware the camera is recording. He's singing along to the radio. He's playfully ripping up papers. He's tossing CDs around the cabin like confetti. He's not scared. He's not angry. He's acting carefree, giddy even, the ransacked. Interior of the car wasn't from a fight. It was from Rico, alone in the dark, behaving, erratically but happily. Outside the car, searchers found his massive size 18 shoes and shoe inserts discarded near the creek bank. His footprints, enormous, unmistakable impressions, led down toward the water. And then they stopped. The physical evidence in this case is scattered across a geography that makes no sense. Rico's car was at Cache Creek, but his cell phone provider registered a ping from Redwood Valley, 70 miles away. A local family later found a backpack discarded on the roadside in that exact area. Inside it was Rico's phone, jumper cables, clothing, and 2 plastic bottles that smelled intensely of hard liquor mixed with energy drinks. That discovery suggested something devastating. Rico had relapsed. After months of recovery, the bottles pointed to a catastrophic fall off the wagon. An empty drug bindle was also found in the vehicle. The man who was supposed to be starting a new life may have been spiraling back into the old one. But the strangest detail came a full week after the car was found. On October 19th, investigators returned to the lower site parking lot and discovered fresh footprints matching Rico's enormous size near the area. Fresh. A week later. That means Rico may have survived in that brutal wilderness for days, circling back to his vehicle and then disappearing again. And then there were the witnesses. Multiple independent, credible people reported seeing a giant man matching Rico's exact description along the roads in the area. He was wandering aimlessly. He was sitting on highway guardrails. One witness said he appeared to be dancing on the side of the road. Because of his enormous size and erratic behavior, passing motorists were too intimidated to stop and offer help. They just drove by. Let's run through the theories, and let's be honest about why none of them fully work. The prevailing theory is the simplest. Rico, awake for over 40 hours and possibly in the grip of a devastating relapse, suffered a severe psychotic break. Sleep deprivation alone can trigger hallucinations, paranoia, and catastrophic decision-making after about 36 hours. Combine that with alcohol and possible drug use, and you have a man whose brain was essentially short-circuiting. He wandered into the wilderness, became hopelessly disoriented in the ravines and brush, and died of exposure. His 300-pound frame would have demanded massive caloric intake, and without food or water, exhaustion would have overtaken him quickly. It's the most logical explanation, and it has real problems. First, Rico was 6'9" and 300 pounds. You do not easily lose a man of that size in the brush. He leaves a trail, he breaks branches, he crushes undergrowth. His footprints are the size of small boats. Search teams deployed ATVs, helicopters with thermal imaging, and bloodhounds across the Cache Creek area. They found the initial footprints and the shoe inserts. Then, they found nothing. The trail just ends at the creek bank as if he stepped into the water and was erased. If he collapsed and died somewhere in that wilderness, where is his body? Where is his clothing? Where is any biological trace of a 300-pound man decomposing in the California sun? Second, the 70-mile gap. His car is at Cache Creek. His phone pings from Redwood Valley, 70 miles north. His backpack is found on the roadside in that same area. How does a man in psychosis travel 70 miles through mountainous terrain? Did someone give him a ride? Did he hitchhike? If so, that person has never come forward, and nobody reported picking up a disoriented 6'9" giant on a rural highway. What about foul play? Maybe Rico encountered someone dangerous at that remote parking lot. Maybe he was robbed, attacked, killed. But think about the target. This is a 6'9", 300-pound former professional athlete. Even in a compromised mental state, subduing a man of that size would require overwhelming force, weapons, multiple attackers, or both, and it would leave evidence: blood, damage to the vehicle, torn clothing, drag marks. There was nothing. No blood at the car, no signs of an external struggle, no defensive wounds on the discarded clothing. Whoever or whatever took Rico Harris did it without a fight, and that is very difficult to do to a man built like a small building. And the staged disappearance theory? Maybe Rico, overwhelmed by the pressure of starting over, faked his own vanishing to escape. But since 2014, his bank accounts have shown zero activity. His social security number has never been used. His credit reports are blank. And let's be realistic. Remaining anonymous and off the grid when you're 6'9" is practically a biological impossibility. You can't hide in a crowd when you're a foot taller than everyone in it. Rico Harris's family has never stopped looking. His mother, his girlfriend, his community, they've organized searches, maintained awareness campaigns, and held onto a hope that is dimmed, but never died. The terrain around Cache Creek is so vast and so unforgiving that there are areas no human has walked in decades. It's possible Rico is out there, somewhere in a ravine or a thicket, beyond the reach of dogs and drones and helicopters. It's possible the wilderness simply absorbed him. But possible isn't the same as satisfying. Because Rico Harris was not a man who disappeared into backgrounds. He was the tallest person in every room he entered. He left size 18 footprints in every surface he walked on. He had a tattoo on his arm that announced exactly who he was. He was, in every measurable way, the hardest kind of human being to lose. And the last record we have of him is a phone video shot in pitch darkness, a giant man sitting alone in his car on a desolate mountain road, singing happily to himself, tossing CDs around like he didn't have a care in the world. And then the video ends, and then the singing stops, and then nothing. A gentle giant driving toward a new life, swallowed whole by the California wilderness. The mountains took him, and they haven't given him back. Timber Creek Campground is not the kind of place you stumble across. It's buried deep in the Salmon Chalice National Forest near Leodore, Idaho, about 120 miles from the nearest city of any size. To get there, you drive through mountain passes, along gravel roads, past nothing and then more nothing until the trees close in and the cell signal drops to zero. It's stunningly beautiful. It's completely isolated. And it is, in every way that matters, the kind of wilderness that does not forgive mistakes. The terrain is brutal. Steep climbs, dense timberlines, fast-running creeks, and a stone reservoir nearby. The altitude alone makes it punishing, and the forest is alive in ways that are easy to forget from the comfort of a campsite. Wolves live here. Mountain lions live here. Bears live here. This is their home. You are a guest and not a particularly welcome one. On July 10, 2015, a 2-year-old boy was brought to this campground by 4 adults. Within roughly 10 minutes of arriving and getting settled, he was gone. No trace, no sound, no trail. A toddler vanished from the middle of a campsite surrounded by 4 people, and a decade of investigation has produced no body, no definitive answer, and no peace for anyone involved. His name was Dior Coons Jr. His family called him Little Man. And what happened to him that afternoon is one of the most bitterly contested, forensically empty disappearances in modern American history. Dior was 2 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, full of the kind of relentless toddler energy that exhausts everyone within a 10-foot radius. On this trip, he was reportedly wearing an oversized camouflage jacket, a detail that becomes important later. He was entirely dependent on the adults around him for survival. A 2-year-old can't open a car door, can't climb a fence, can't walk more than a few hundred feet without getting tired. Whatever happened to Dior, it happened within a very small radius of that campsite. The adults with him formed an unusual group: his mother, Jessica Mitchell, his father, Vernal Dior Coons Sr., his great-grandfather, Bob Walton, a 76-year-old man who required a supplemental oxygen tank and was easily confused, and Bob's friend, Isaac Reinwand, a local man who later told investigators something that raised immediate eyebrows. He claimed he had never actually met the parents or the child before this trip. Think about that. A spur-of-the-moment camping trip to one of the most remote campgrounds in Idaho, and one of the 4 adults present says he'd never met the toddler or his parents before. That's an unusual group dynamic for an intimate family outing in the middle of nowhere. The group departed Idaho Falls that morning in a truck towing a camper, making the roughly 2-hour drive into the mountains. They stopped at the Stage Shop, a small convenience store in Leodore, to pick up supplies. This stop becomes a point of serious contention. The parents told police they were at the store around 1 p.m., but the store clerk later testified adamantly that she saw the blonde toddler at the store closer to 6 p.m. The parents dismissed this as the clerk being confused. A 5-hour discrepancy. That's not a rounding error, that's a chasm. They arrived at Timber Creek and set up the camper and campsite. By all accounts, the setup was routine, mundane even, and then Jessica and Vernal decided to take a walk. They wanted to explore the area, maybe find a good spot to fish by the creek. They claimed they specifically left 2-year-old Dior in the care of great-grandfather Bob at the campsite. It was only going to be a few minutes, 10, maybe 15. Bob was right there. The kid was right there. What could go wrong? Here's what allegedly happened. Bob assumed Dior had toddled after his parents toward the creek. The parents assumed Dior was with Bob at the campsite. Nobody was watching the child. For somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes, a 2-year-old was accountable to nobody. When Jessica and Vernal returned to the campsite, they asked Bob where Dior was. Bob said he thought the boy was with them. The realization hit like a brick wall. They searched the immediate area, the brush, the camper, the truck. 20 frantic minutes of looking, nothing. To make the 911 call, someone had to drive down the mountain just to find a cell signal. When they finally got through, the response was massive. Search and rescue teams, K9 units, ATVs, horseback searchers, deep-water divers for the creek and reservoir. They threw everything at it. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a thread from the camo jacket, not a footprint, not a scent trail the dogs could follow. A 2-year-old boy had evaporated from the middle of a campsite in broad daylight. Let's walk through the theories, because every single one of them has a problem that won't go away. Start with the most immediate fear in the Idaho backcountry: an animal attack, a wolf, a mountain lion, a bear. The forest around Timber Creek is active predator habitat. A small, defenseless toddler wandering alone would be an easy target. It's a terrifying thought, and in this environment, it's not unreasonable. But let's look at the facts. A predator snatching a child is not a silent, clean event. It's violent. It's loud. A 2-year-old being grabbed by a wolf or a cougar would scream. The animal would drag the child through brush, leaving a trail of disturbed ground, broken branches, blood, and torn fabric. Expert trackers and cadaver dogs were deployed across the area within hours. They found absolutely nothing. No blood, no fur, no drag marks, no shredded camo jacket snagged on a branch. A predator does not silently levitate a child out of a campsite and leave zero trace. Nature is messy. This scene was sterile. Now, in 2024, a development reignited this theory. A private investigator named David Marshburn, working with cadaver dogs, made a discovery high up on a treacherous mountain face above the campground, a child's 2-tone North Face fleece pullover. The jacket was heavily stained with what appeared to be blood and bore severe animal markings: scratching, biting, clawing. It was manufactured in 2014 or 2015, perfectly aligning with Dior's timeline. And Marshburn made a pointed observation. This specific North Face design has no pockets. An animal tearing into it wasn't searching for a stray granola bar. It was trying to get to whatever was wrapped inside. The Idaho State Police Crime Lab extracted a partial DNA profile from the degraded garment, but the results were too compromised to produce a definitive match. So the fleece sits in evidence, heavily suggestive, deeply disturbing, and ultimately inconclusive. What about stranger abduction? Could someone have driven up that single dirt road, spotted the toddler alone during a 5 to 15-minute window of miscommunication, snatched him silently, and driven away without crossing paths with a single member of the group? Law enforcement has explicitly called this the least likely scenario. Timber Creek is profoundly remote. The access road is a single track. A vehicle arriving and departing would have been heard, if not seen. The timing window is absurdly narrow, and a kidnapper targeting a random campsite in the Idaho wilderness, banking on a momentary gap in supervision, is a level of opportunistic predation that borders on fiction. It's not impossible, but it's about as close to impossible as you can get without actually being there. Which brings us to the theory that has consumed this case and destroyed whatever was left of the family: the cover-up. Under intense investigative pressure, both Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Kunz failed multiple polygraph examinations. Polygraphs aren't admissible evidence and they're not foolproof, but failing multiple independent tests is a pattern that investigators take seriously. Then came the private investigators. The family hired their own PIs specifically to clear their names. Instead, the opposite happened. Philip Klein, a well-known Texas-based private investigator, and Frank Vilt, a veteran forensic interviewer, both resigned from or were fired off the case. Their public statements were devastating. They concluded, independently, that the parents were being deceptive and possessed direct knowledge of what happened to their son. Klein didn't mince words. He said the child was dead, and the parents knew. The Lemhi County Sheriff took the extraordinary step of formally naming both parents as suspects and persons of interest. No arrests have been made, no confessions have been given. The case remains open. But here's the logic gap that cuts both ways. If the parents accidentally or intentionally caused Dior's death, they would have had to conceal a body in rugged wilderness terrain in a matter of minutes, before the 911 call, before searchers arrived, before dogs could pick up a scent. And they would have had to do it so thoroughly that a decade of professional searches, cadaver dogs, divers, and aerial surveys have found nothing. And then 2 adults, plus a confused 76-year-old and a man who claims he didn't know them, would need to maintain the exact same lie, perfectly, under years of police interrogation, media scrutiny, and public pressure, without a single one of them cracking. People break, secrets leak, conspiracies involving 4 people almost always collapse under their own weight. This one hasn't. Either these 4 adults are the most disciplined liars in true crime history, or the truth is something none of the theories fully capture. The suspicion tore the family apart. Jessica and Vernal split. Public accusations flew. Online sleuths dissected every interview, every inconsistency, every micro-expression. The adults who were supposed to protect Dior became the primary suspects in his disappearance. And through all of it, the only person who matters, a 2-year-old boy in an oversized camo jacket, remains lost. The fleece found on the mountain in 2024 was the closest thing to a physical clue this case has produced in a decade. It sits in a lab, partially decoded, suggesting something unspeakable happened on that mountain, but not quite proving it. The DNA is degraded. The answer is right there, blurred just past the point of certainty. Dior Kuntz Jr. vanished during a 10 to 15 minute window at a remote campsite surrounded by 4 adults in terrain so rugged that a toddler couldn't have walked more than a few hundred feet on his own. No body, no definitive evidence, no confession, no closure, just a campground in the Idaho mountains, a torn fleece jacket, and a question that has no good answer. The mountains took little man, and 10 years later, they haven't given him back. In 1953, nobody in La Crosse, Wisconsin, locked their doors. That's not an exaggeration. That's not nostalgia. That's how life actually worked in a small Midwestern town in the early 50s. Neighbors knew each other by name. Kids played in the streets until dark. Fathers went to work, mothers kept house. And the biggest excitement on a Saturday night was the local football game. It was safe, deeply, boringly, fundamentally safe. The kind of safe that people in 2025 can barely imagine. On Saturday, October 24th, 1953, the entire town of La Crosse was buzzing about exactly one thing: the La Crosse State College homecoming football game. It was the event of the season. Almost everyone was going: families, couples, students, and a significant chunk of the local police force. The streets around the stadium were packed. The residential neighborhoods, by contrast, were quiet, emptied out, lit by porch lights and not much else. The weather was crisp, chilly and overcast, dropping toward a low of 38 degrees by nightfall. The kind of fall evening where you can see your breath and the leaves are thick on the ground. On Hushler Drive, a quiet suburban street lined with modest, well-kept homes, the windows glowed warm and the night felt perfectly still. Inside one of those homes, a 15-year-old girl was settling in for a quiet evening of studying and babysitting. By the next morning, her name would be on the front page of every newspaper in Wisconsin, and the people of La Crosse would start locking their doors for the first time in their lives. Evelyn Grace Hartley was 15, just a few weeks shy of her 16th birthday. She was a junior at Central High School, a straight-A student with a deep interest in science, a skilled piano player, and an active member of the drama club. She wore distinctive eyeglasses and stood about 5'7", physically mature and striking for her age. Every single person who knew her described her the same way: responsible, reliable, well-liked, and completely without enemies or behavioral issues. She was the kind of teenager parents trusted implicitly. That evening, Evelyn had been hired as a last-minute replacement babysitter for the 20-month-old daughter of Viggo Rasmussen, a college professor and a colleague of her father's. The Rasmussens were heading to the homecoming game. Evelyn would watch the baby, study her textbooks, and wait for them to come home. It was the most ordinary assignment imaginable. Professor Rasmussen picked Evelyn up from her family's home at 6:20 p.m. and drove her to his house. She arrived carrying 4 or 5 heavy textbooks, fully intending to spend the evening studying. She had no plans to go anywhere. She had no reason to leave. She had no enemies, no secret boyfriend, no troubled history of any kind. She walked into that house as a 15-year-old girl on a Saturday night, and she never walked out. At 8:30 p.m., Evelyn was supposed to call her father, Richard Hartley, for a mandatory check-in. This was a strict, pre-arranged routine. Evelyn was responsible enough to honor it without fail. At 8:30, the call didn't come. Richard waited. Maybe she lost track of time. Maybe the baby needed attention. He called the Rasmussen house. The phone rang and rang. Nobody picked up. He called again. Nothing. The phone just kept ringing into an empty house where the lights were on and a radio was playing. By 9:20 p.m., Richard was in his car. He drove to the Rasmussen residence on Hushler Drive. When he arrived, the house looked undisturbed from the front. The doors were locked. The lights were on inside. The radio was still blaring, but something was wrong. The silence behind the noise was wrong. He knocked. No answer. Richard walked around the exterior of the house. On the side, he found a basement window standing open with the protective screen removed. He crawled through it. What he found inside shattered everything. The living room was in violent disarray. Furniture had been shoved out of its normal alignment. Evelyn's textbooks were scattered across the floor. Her eyeglasses, shattered with blood on the frames, lay abandoned near the furniture. One of her shoes was found in one room. The other was found in the basement. Bloody smears marked the walls near the basement window. And upstairs, in her crib, the 20-month-old baby was sound asleep, completely unharmed, completely undisturbed. Let that detail register. Whatever happened in that living room, the overturned furniture, the broken glasses, the blood on the walls, was apparently not enough to wake a sleeping baby one floor up. Or the attackers simply didn't care about the child. Their focus was entirely, exclusively on Evelyn. Richard ran across the street to a neighbor, Frank Linder. The police were called and arrived by 9:49 p.m. What they found when they processed the scene turned a missing teenager case into something far more terrifying. Forensic examination revealed deep pry marks on 3 separate windows of the house. Someone had tried multiple entry points before succeeding at the basement window. A short stepladder belonging to the homeowner had been moved from elsewhere on the property and positioned beneath the open window. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a sustained, determined effort to get inside. And the blood evidence was devastating. Copious amounts of blood matching Evelyn's type were found, smeared inside the house near the basement window. Outside, 2 massive pools of blood had soaked into the yard, one measuring 18 inches in diameter. 18 inches. That's not a cut finger. That's a severely wounded person, hemorrhaging onto the grass. But the most chilling detail was found 100 feet away. On the outer wall of a neighbor's garage, investigators discovered a bloody handprint, smeared desperately against the siding, approximately 4 feet off the ground. Additional bloodstains were found on yet another neighboring house. The blood trail didn't stay in one place. It moved. It traveled across yards through the dark for 2 full blocks. Police brought in bloodhounds. The dogs picked up Evelyn's scent at the basement window and followed it through the neighborhood for exactly 2 blocks down Cooley Drive. And then, the scent stopped. Dead. It vanished into the street at a spot where investigators found another pool of blood. That was the spot where Evelyn Hartley was thrown into a vehicle. A local resident named Ed Hofer provided the most terrifying piece of the puzzle. He told police that earlier that evening he'd been nearly run off the road by a speeding dark green 2-tone 1942 Buick. As the car passed, he looked inside. He saw one man driving erratically and a second man in the back seat holding a girl wedged between them. But here's the gut punch. Hofer said that even earlier that night, before the near collision, he had seen these same 2 men physically dragging a girl down the street by her arms. He assumed she was drunk and they were helping her. He didn't intervene. He didn't call anyone. In 1953, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, you didn't assume the worst. You assumed people were being neighborly. Let's tear this apart. Because the physical evidence tells a story, but the logic behind each theory still has cracks. Forget the runaway theory immediately. A 15-year-old girl does not leave her shattered, bloody eyeglasses on the floor, abandon one shoe in the basement, and smear blood across the walls of a house she's sneaking out of. This was not a voluntary departure. The crime scene is unambiguous. Evelyn Hartley fought for her life inside that house. She fought hard, and she lost. What about a burglary gone wrong? The pry marks on 3 separate windows suggest someone who was determined to get in, which could fit a burglar casing what they assumed was an empty house during the homecoming game. Maybe they broke in expecting nobody home, found Evelyn, panicked, and grabbed her to silence a witness. But here's the problem. Nothing was stolen. Not a single item of value was taken from the Rasmussen home. If you're a panicked burglar who just discovered an unexpected teenager, your instinct is to run, not to engage in a prolonged, bloody physical struggle. Drag a fighting, bleeding 15-year-old girl out of a basement window, through 2 blocks of a residential neighborhood, and into a waiting car. That's not panic. That's a plan. A burglar runs, a predator takes, and that leads to the most likely and most disturbing explanation. Evelyn Hartley was targeted. The pry marks on multiple windows suggest attackers who were determined to get inside regardless of difficulty. The stepladder was repositioned deliberately. The attack was focused entirely on the teenager, ignoring the baby upstairs. And the escape route, through the basement, across yards, 2 blocks to a waiting vehicle, implies planning, not improvisation. But even this theory has a maddening gap. How do you drag a bleeding, struggling teenage girl through 2 blocks of a quiet residential neighborhood, past houses, past yards, under streetlights, without anyone stopping you? Ed Hofer saw them. He saw 2 men dragging a girl by her arms, and he assumed it was innocent. A few neighbors reported hearing what sounded like a scream, but dismissed it as kids playing on a Saturday night. The attackers moved through a neighborhood full of potential witnesses and relied on the one thing that 1953 America guaranteed. Nobody assumed the worst. Nobody intervened. The era of unlocked doors protected the killers as much as it had once protected the community. In 2004, a bizarre and deeply credible clue surfaced. A man named Mel Williams produced an audio recording he had covertly captured in a local bar back in 1969. On the tape, a man named Clyde Tyree Peterson can be heard explicitly implicating himself and an accomplice named Jack Gallfair in Evelyn's murder. Peterson claimed they buried her in Lafarge, Wisconsin. By the time the tape surfaced, both men had been dead for decades. The confession couldn't be tested, the witness couldn't be cross-examined, and no excavation has ever confirmed the burial site. The closest thing this case has to an answer came from a dead man's voice on a 35-year-old bar recording. The search for Evelyn Hartley was historically massive. Over 2,000 people, including the National Guard and local Boy Scout troops, scoured La Crosse County. Gas station attendants across the region were ordered to inspect every vehicle for bloodstains. Lie detector tests were administered to dozens of local men and high school students. Days later, blood-stained clothing was discovered miles from the Rasmussen home, but it was never conclusively linked to Evelyn. Her body has never been found. La Crosse changed after that night. The town that never locked its doors started locking them. The community that assumed the best in people learned, violently, that assumption could be fatal. Evelyn Hartley didn't just disappear from a house on Hushler Drive, she disappeared from an entire era's sense of safety. 70 years later, the Rasmussen house still stands on its quiet street. The baby Evelyn was protecting that night grew up never knowing what happened to the girl who was watching over her. And somewhere in the Wisconsin earth, maybe in Lafarge, maybe somewhere else entirely, Evelyn Hartley remains where her attackers left her. A blaring radio, a sleeping baby, a pair of shattered, bloody eyeglasses on the living room floor, and a 15-year-old girl who was dragged into the night by men her neighbors mistook for Good Samaritans. The ultimate American nightmare, born on the quietest street in the safest town in the country.